Good morning, boys and girls. Today, we're going to continue our learning on this multiplication math that we've been working on in Chapter 3. So yesterday for homework, you had to complete a small homework assignment that had you practicing on doing some mental math. And that was on workbook pages 33 and 34. So just to kind of take a couple of minutes to review what it was that we did in class yesterday, we looked at a couple of different things. One of the things that we looked at was how to multiply bigger numbers that all have zeros at the end and come up with our answer, or what we call our product, in a really quick way. This mental math will help to save us time on some of these timed tests that we would have as we get a little bit older in some of the math that we do. So if you can recall, these are examples of problems that we did yesterday in class. We knew that there was a three-step solution that we could use to get to success in solving these kinds of problems. So to check and see if your memory didn't forget, step one is to multiply the numbers that are not zeros. So if we look at example number 1 here, we would multiply our 7 times our 6 first, which would give us a 42. So we would then take that answer and we would place that answer directly under our answer line. Then step 2 would be to count how many zeros are in the actual problem. So in this example here, I only see 1 0 in the whole problem. That 1 0 will match how many zeros go down here in my answer. So since there's only 1 0 in the problem, there's going to be 1 0 in my answer. So for number 1, our quick mental math for these kind of problems gave us an answer of 420. If we move down the page a little bit and we see some that are a little bit trickier, we can come down here to something like, let's try this, 3,000 times 20. So for this one, nothing changes. We still multiply the numbers that are not 0 first, and that would be my 3 and my 2. So when I do 3 times 2, I get 6. That goes down there in my answer line. And then I count how many zeros are in the whole problem. Well, this one has some zeros up here next to the 3, but then there's also a 0 down here next to the 2. So if I count all of those up, I count 4 zeros. All 4 of those zeros are going to come down here next to my 6 in my answer line. And so this gives me my answer of 60,000. So that's quick mental math for you to use some multiplication with some zeros. You did that for homework yesterday, and those are the things that you have submitted to me in the Google Classroom. Please make sure that when you turn those into the Google Classroom, since we are not together, you have to turn in the page. You can take a picture of it and you can send me the picture. You can email it to me. It's really the easiest way is to just take a picture and then load your picture directly into your Google Classroom. But some of you are just hitting the turn in button and you're not turning anything into me, and I have nothing to grade or to see how well you did. So I've been sending a lot of things back to you saying there's no attachment. If you're getting those emails, it's because when you're turning stuff in, you're not turning any work into me. So remember that when we're not together, you have to turn that work into me the only way that I can get it, which would be through the Google Classroom or either through an email. Okay, so then we moved into this power of 10. And we started playing a little bit with these exponents. So we learned that this big number here is called a base, and then the little number next to it's called the exponent. And we practiced some of those problems and how to multiply problems that have exponents as well as numbers. And so we can kind of scroll through here and see if we go way down here to the bottom, a problem like 50 times 3 times 10 to the second power. I think Abube in one of the classes worked this one out with us, but he chose to work the exponent part first, which was the right choice. So I went ahead and put some parentheses around that. He took the knowledge that he learned in multiplying exponents, and he knew that he drops his 1 into his answer, and the exponent, which is a 2 in this example, tells me that those 2 zeros go into my answer. So 10 to the second power is the same as 100. Bringing down everything that's left, my multiplication sign, my 3, my multiplication sign, and then my 50. And now I have to figure out what I want to do next. So Bube chose to work 50 times 3 next. So I put parentheses around 50 times 3. This kind of isolates that part of the problem, so our brain knows that that's the only stuff we're working on right now. So when I do 50 times 3, this goes back to how I do that mental math. I multiply the numbers that are not 0 first. So 5 times 3 gives me 15. And there's only 1 0 in this problem. So that 1 0 goes down here into my answer. That's where I got 150. If I bring down everything else that's left, the multiplication sign and the 100, I'm now left with one final step, and that's to multiply 150 times 100. And where that sounds and looks like a little bit of a scary problem, we learned yesterday that it's actually really simple by just following those 3 steps. Multiply the numbers that are not zeros. So this one has a 15 and this one has a 1. 15 times 1 is 15. And there are 3 zeros in the problem, so all 3 go down into the answer. So that's a quick review of lesson 3-2. And hopefully you understood everything that lesson brought and had you work on, because today we're going to move into our next lesson, which is going to be lesson 3.3. So as we can see on here, lesson 3.3, this is estimating products. Now, I know some of us have never really enjoyed every chapter that we have ever come across that had us do some estimating. It was always something that was never really fun. That front end estimation sometimes kind of rattled our brain a little bit, and it just made it a little bit tricky. But for this particular one, I feel like you're going to enjoy it and you're going to realize it's really simple, because for this particular lesson, now that we know how to multiply using these zeros, we can estimate the product of larger multiplication problems. So in your notes, what you should be doing right now, and you can pause the video if you need to, but you should be writing this stuff into your notes. So you want to title your notes today, lesson 3-3, estimating products. And you're going to tell yourself what's here in red is that we're going to use everything that we have learned about multiplying with zeros to help us estimate, which is get a good guess at what we think some of these larger multiplication problems will come out to be, okay? And this is going to be a really big time saver. That's why I wrote this kind of in next to these little stars. An example of something like this time test would be a MAPS test. When we take these MAP tests, and we'll take it sometime around the spring, but you will have questions on there that will have you do things just like this. So if you can answer some of these math problems really quick using the stuff that you've learned, it will definitely help you, throughout the test that you take. So let's look at what some of these problems are going to have us learn a little bit about today. So the first thing that I want you to put into your notes is that to be a pro, and a pro is a word that I kind of used silly. That's why I put my little smiley face underneath it. A pro, like if we think about a pro or a professional, is somebody who is so good and hardly ever makes mistakes. So to be a pro at estimating products, there's one important thing that you will need to know. And that one important thing is that you're going to round each of the numbers to the greatest place in that number. So again, these are important notes for you to have down in your notebook. So if you need to ever pause this video, because we're not meeting live today, so if you need to pause this video and get this information down, now's the time to do it, because here in a second, we're going to kind of look at an example of what I mean with rounding to the greatest place in that number. So now that we're ready to kind of move on, let's look at an example of what this looks like. So let's say we were given a problem, and our problem is something like $36.74, and we're going to multiply that by the number 114. So a situation might be something like, let's say that we were looking to buy a product or an item. And let's say that product costs $36.74. And for whatever reason, we wanted to buy 114 of those things. And I want to know, how much money is that going to cost me? Like, about how much money am I going to spend? If one item costs $36.74 and I want to buy 114 of them, about how much money am I going to spend? Well, this could be a hard math problem to solve if I didn't have a calculator. Luckily, as you get a little bit older, problems like these, your teachers will let you use calculators for. But right now, since you're still in the learning stages, we have to learn how would we solve this if we didn't have a calculator with us. So the first thing you're going to do if we're going to estimate what our answer is going to be, which means we're not going to get the exact answer. We're going to get an answer that's kind of close, we hope, to what the real answer is going to be. So we're going to look at the largest place. So now this is where we can kind of think, now I understand why it was so important that we spent time on chapters 1 and chapters 2 with place value, because we have to know the value of a number when it sits in a certain place. So this 3 is the largest place in this whole number. So if I look at the whole number as like $36.74, the digit that is in the highest or the greatest place is the 3. Okay. If I come to the opposite side, in the number 114, the number that's in the greatest place here is this number 1, because it's sitting in the hundreds place. And we know that the hundreds place is bigger than the tens place, and the tens place is bigger than the ones place. So if we're looking for the place that's the greatest, that would be the digit all the way to the left. So in this example, it's our 1, and over here in this number's example, it's our 3. So it tells us we're going to round each of those number to that place. Okay, so now we're going to use all of our rounding rules that we were taught. So hopefully we haven't forgotten those, and we've been practicing a whole lot with them. But when we round, if you need that recipe, go back to it. But what we learn is that we take the number that's underlined. So in this example, it's our 3 because it's the largest place. And in this example, it's a 1 because it's the largest place. And we're going to look at the number right next to it, the number to the right. If that number next to it is 5 or more, hopefully in your mind you're saying, we're going to go up a floor. So that means my 3 is going to turn into a 4. So if we look down here, it shows us what's happening. The 3 is going to turn into a 4, and everything after is going to turn to zeros. So that would mean my 6 is going to turn to a 0, my 7 is going to turn to a 0, and my 4 is going to turn to a 0. Now, if we look at over here on the opposite side, we have the 1. Well, this 1, if I look at the number to the right is not 5 or more. So that means my 1 is going to stay where it is. So if I scroll down here into where the rest of the problem is located, here's where we see what we've done with this problem. We have rounded $36.74, I believe it was. We've rounded that to about $40. And then our 114, we've rounded to about 100. So we rounded each of those to the largest place. And so that's where my 40 came from. And then this is where my 100 came from. Now we go with what we learned yesterday when we were in class together. We simply multiply the numbers that are not zeros first. So the first thing that we're going to do, oh, boys and girls, I think my screen might have froze up on me again. In the world of technology, it happens. So Miss Malone's going to have to close this out, and I'm going to have to get back on. So just be patient with me for a second until I can get back where I need to be. Sorry for these hiccups. They sometimes happen. But this would be a good time to pause your video if you need to and get the notes that maybe you missed because I was going a little bit quickly. Okay, so I think we might be back and ready to roll. Okay, so as we move back to where we were down here learning how to do some of this mental math, okay? So we were taking $36.74 and we rounded it to $40. And then we took that 114 and we rounded it to 100. So now what we're going to do is take those two numbers and we're simply going to multiply those two numbers together. And we learned how to do this yesterday. So this is what step 2 down here says. So step 1 told us to round to the greatest place, which we just did. And then step 2 tells us to round, or to multiply, I'm sorry, using mental math. So now we're going to multiply the stuff that is not zeros first. So as you can see here, the 4 is not a 0 and the 1 is not a 0. So if I multiply 4 times 1, that's where my 4 comes down here at the bottom in my answer. Then yesterday we learned we count how many zeros are in the problem. Well, as you can see in this problem, we have 1 0 right here, 2 zeros right here, and 3 zeros right here. And each of those zeros fall back down here into our answer. And so that's where this arrow is showing us. That's where those 3 zeros came from. Okay, so when I multiply both of those, this is what I get. Now I have to make sure that because this was a money problem, I've got to make sure that I put my decimal and I put my dollar sign back into my answer. So up here, the 40 actually had a decimal point right behind it. So that means the 40 is going to have a decimal point, it's going to have a decimal point actually at the end of it. So Miss Malone has her decimal point in the wrong place there. But we have to make sure we put our decimal point and our dollar sign back into our answer. So if we look at a problem like this, this is where we come up with our answer, is by multiplying those two things together. You will see a couple of problems like this that are on your work for today, where you will have to multiply these numbers together. And some of them might actually be money problems. So you got to make sure that you definitely are putting those dollar signs and those decimals back into your answer, okay? Ignore the decimal point here. Miss Malone has a tiny little boo-boo. This decimal point is not supposed to be there, but instead it's supposed to be at the back over here, which would mean that our answer actually turns out to be not $40, but $4,000. So that's how much, if I was looking to buy something and one of those items cost me $36.74 and I wanted to buy like 114 of them, if I did all of that math, that means it's going to cost me about $4,000 to buy all of that stuff. Okay, so at this point, I want you to kind of practice some. So I'm going to take you to another page. And on this page, you're going to see some practice problems, okay? So I'm going to scroll down the screen because there's a total of what I think is about 8 practice problems. And I want you to take time at home practicing these. If we were together on our Google Meet, then I would break you into individual breakout rooms and have you work on some of these problems with some of your classmates. But because it's a Tuesday and on Tuesdays, we don't get to meet for our math class, I'm going to have you kind of do this at home. So remember, practice is what makes you better. So if you do like 3 or 4 of them and you feel like you're getting it and you're not having any difficulty, then you don't have to really complete all 8. But the more practice you do, the better you're going to become at doing this kind of math. So again, this is estimating. We're not really looking to get the exact answer, but we're trying to estimate what we think the answer is going to be. So as you can look right here on our practice page, the star tells me to round to the greatest place. So I'll do the first one with you just to make sure that everybody understands how we're going to go about solving this particular problem. So if the first number is 88, I'm going to round that number to the highest place. So in 88, the highest place would be this 8 right here because it's sitting in the tens place. And if I round and I look at the number to the right, you should be telling yourself that that number next to it is 5 or more. So this 88 is going to round up to the number 90. Okay, now let's do the same thing with our 51. If I look at the 51, the greatest place is the 5. The number next door is not 5 or more, so that means my 51 is actually going to stay or round to a 50. And now I can do this math because this is what I did yesterday for my homework, which was multiply numbers that have zeros at the end. So I'm going to multiply the two numbers that are not zeros, 9 times 5, and 9 times 5, you should be telling yourself, is 45. And then this problem has two zeros in it, so you're going to put both of those zeros down here into your answer. So this is what I want to see you doing, okay? So where yesterday was a little bit of mental math, and you didn't have to do that stuff by showing work, today I want to see the work. Okay, so when you do it in the workbook, if you have room in the workbook to kind of do it how I just did it right here next to the problem, then that's fine. But if you don't have space and you feel like things are getting all squished up and crammed together, then you might want to get a separate sheet of paper to make sure that things don't get too confusing and too bunched up. All right. So these are practice problems. I want you to work on 2 and 3. And as you see, the deeper they go, the bigger they get. Okay, so you get to like where we have big numbers like 685 times 323. And again, I don't want you getting the actual answer. You're working on your estimating skills in this lesson for today. Okay, and like I wouldn't have enough space right here to work this problem, so I would definitely have to use another piece of paper in order to work out this problem and get my estimated answer. If you want, you can even try the additional 2 down here, which are those number problems, but they do have decimals in them, and sometimes decimals can kind of be a little bit trickier. So if you don't feel that confident in working those, then you don't really have to. But there might be a couple on your assignment today that you do in your workbook that will be money related. So how can you check to see if you got the right answer? Well, since we're not together, the best way for you to check would be for you to use a calculator and type in what the actual answer really is. And if your answer is really close to the actual answer, then most likely you did this correctly. Okay, so at this point, you can pause your video as you kind of work through finding the answers to these 6 problems. And if you want to attempt the last 2, which are the money problems down below, then go ahead and give it a shot. Okay. All right, now that we're back together and you've had the chance to kind of practice through those problems, we do have one extra little thing that we're going to see in our homework for today, and that is something called clustering. Now, clustering is when we put things together, or kind of like our stars say here, where we work maybe in groups of 2, or we work where we put things that go together in the same group, and we find the answer to a problem using clustering. Okay, now this is probably new. This is probably something that you've never seen before, but I gave you an example, and the example is right here. So this looks like a real scary example, because look how many numbers I have listed and how many of them are trying to be added together. So like in this problem, we've got 25 plus 31 plus 32 plus 31 plus 28 plus 34 plus 31 plus 29 plus 29. So I don't want you to find the exact answer. I want you to estimate. If somebody gave you all of those numbers and said, about how much do you think that would add up to be? Well, the easiest way is going to be to cluster them, to put things together that are like each other. So that's where step 1 says you can solve by putting like numbers together. So as you notice, all of these numbers up here have a red line under that. That's because actually all of them have something in common. So my question to you is, if all of them are underlined in red, what do they all have in common? And I'm going to show you the answer, but I want you to kind of work your brain and look at these for a minute and see if you can figure out what is it that they all have in common. And some of you are going to notice, well, there's a 31 here and a 31 here and a 31 here. Those are all the same, but there's something that every one of them have in common. So if you want to take a minute to think, pause your video here and kind of get your brain exercising and see if you can stare at these numbers for a minute and find what it is that they all have in common. All right, now that it's time to see if you got it. The thing that they all have in common is that they all round to the number 30. So I don't know if you got that or not, but if you did, reach up high and pat yourself on the back because you did some big brain work. But let's go back and look at this stuff. They really all do round to 30. If I look at this number, it has a 2 in the front. The number next to it is 5 or more. So if I round this number, it rounds to 30. This one also rounds to 30. This one 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 rounds to 30. This one, that one, and the final one. They all actually round to the number 30. Because if we use estimating and we round to the biggest place and we don't round incorrectly, then we'll notice that every single one of these numbers actually rounds to the number 30. So when you see problems like this on your work today, try to see what they have in common first. See if they all round to a certain number, like my example did. Because if so, look how easy this is. Now that we know they all round to 30, we say, okay, well, how many numbers were there? Well, there were 9 different numbers in that problem. Let's go back up and look and let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So if there was 9 different numbers in this problem, then all we have to do is multiply 30 times 9, and we get 270. So we estimate that if I added all those numbers together, I would get an answer that was somewhere around 270. Isn't that so easy? It's amazing when we kind of learn these little tricks that math has to make things that look scary, like these big old problems, and it turns into something that could be pretty simple. So you can check to see if you got the answer by adding all of these things together. And then the number you get is going to be the real number. But if the real number is really close to your estimated number, which in our example, our estimated number was 270, you'll see that we were really close. Okay. All right. So boys and girls, if you have any difficulty at this point, you can pause the video and go back and kind of watch things that we already did. I know we kind of moved a little quickly through some of this, but that's what's great about these videos is that we can load them and we can watch them and we can review them and we can pause them and do all these things that we need to do to help us to learn some of this tougher math. Okay, so your assignment for today is going to be to complete workbook pages 35 and 36. It's going to have these kinds of problems on it. So as you look at those 2 workbook pages, you're going to see that you're going to have to estimate the product, which is going to be estimate the answer to the multiplication problem that you see. And we have learned how to do this. We've practiced it. We did it early in our lesson today. So that's what you're going to work through to solve. And then you're going to see some that are like the one we just tried, where there's a bunch of numbers that we're adding together, and you're going to estimate the sum, which means you're going to look for clusters. You're going to see if you can find something in common that you can use to help you add all those numbers together. And if they don't all round to the certain number, then maybe just kind of put a couple of them together. Find whatever it is that they have in common and work with those numbers first. Okay, so I want you to complete workbook pages 35 and 36. And again, don't forget that when you're finished, you have to take a picture of it and load it into the Google Classroom so that I can see your answers. If I can't see your answers, I won't know or believe that you actually completed the assignment. And then lastly, don't forget to finish your IXL minutes for this week. I'm going to hopefully today, we're going to have a little team talk in our Google Meet about these IXL minutes because some of you are doing amazing with it and some of you are not watching are not doing minutes ever. And every single week, I'm putting a grade in for how many minutes you do. So for some of you, if you don't do any minutes, you're getting 50s as grades for these minutes that you're not completing. So, I want you to make sure that whatever you would be doing here at school is what you're supposed to be doing at home. And I know IXL's been down, but Mr. Reed is working on it. It has something to do with our licensing at our school. And so they're waiting, IXL is waiting to get something from Margaret Mary, and then things will be back up and running. So hopefully by the time you're watching this, things are all good and we're moving back in the right direction. So if it's working and you have the ability to log in and to get going on those minutes, make sure that you get those minutes finished. Okay. All right, boys and girls, I think at this point, We're we don't have anything left today that we have to kind of go over. But if you have any questions about things that we did, know you can email me or ask me questions. And then when we come back together on Wednesday, we'll kind of take time quickly going over this to make sure everybody understands what it was that we did today. Okay. Enjoy your day. Thanks, boys and girls.